Guys, I want to introduce you to Randy Ramirez, who's the closer for our new title company, Momentous Title. And we are here in the Turtle Creek office on the first floor. So come visit us, please. But we'll be making the rounds too to meet all of you guys. He's been super excited to have him. He has been so fun and he's so knowledgeable, and it's going to be awesome. I'm super excited. We already have a handful of deals going, which is exciting. So hopefully we'll be getting one from you guys soon, but we're going to have him walk through the how to be an expert at the closing table and what you need to know. So here we go. Thank you, Randy.
Right. Thank you, Zareen. Hi, everyone. Glad to be here this morning. I tend to be long-winded, so I'm going to try not to talk too much because I know we only have an hour. So we'll go ahead and get started.
That looks good.
Give me 1 second. Let me rearrange this. Okay, sorry. All right. So be an expert at the closing table. So this is going to be kind of like an overview of what y'all can expect at the closing table, you know, from your favorite title company, Momentous. So sorry, guys. I keep having technical difficulties here.
He has all new equipment, so it's a learning curve for sure.
So here's my contact information. Some of you may already have it, but there it is, just in case you don't. And it'll be at the end of the slideshow as well. And I could reach out to y'all individually just so you'll have it and you can save my information. Okay. The agenda for the class today is the general closing process. We are going to review the closing disclosure form, also known as the CD. We've got a seller CD, we've got a buyer CD, and we have a just a settlement statement that's used for cash transactions as well as for hard money deals. And those are hard monies typically used for investment purchases. We'll have a brief review of the other closing documents that the buyer and seller may sign at closing. It's what we call the title company littles. Some other title companies call them junk docs, but I don't really like that term, so I just call them littles. And let's see how the closing works, what goes on at the table, the communication leading up to and after closing, and then the best practices to facilitate a smooth closing for everyone. So, all right. So our role as the title company, basically once we receive the executed contracts, we'll then open title and do a complete title search on the property. And the title commitment typically takes, I would venture to say 2 to 3 days, 2 to 3 business days, as long as it's in the DFW area. If it's outside of the major DFW counties, it could take 2 to 3 weeks, depending on the type of property it is, especially if it's farm and ranch. Those tend to take a little bit longer. But we do keep everyone up to date as far as timeframes go at the beginning of the transaction. So that way everyone's aware of the timelines that we're working with. So we also prepare the closing documents. And I am the escrow officer between both parties, seller and buyer. Okay.
So does that make sense? What a title company is really doing is that they're going into the real property records and searching everything that encumbers the property. And then what the title company commitment is you guys and your clients get a document that says, this is everything we found that encumbers the property. And that's what the clients are kind of supposed to review, so they understand what they're getting and what will be cleaned up before closing. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Feel free to interrupt me at any time if y'all have any questions about any piece. Okay. Review.
I should have warned Randy, I interrupt a lot, so.
Oh, that's fine.
Warning.
Feel free. Okay, so this is an estimated closing disclosure. This is the seller's side. So we're going to be reviewing this first. At the top, it shows the usual information. You've got the closing date, settlement agent, property address, sales price, buyer and seller. See, Elvis is not dead; he's still around.
Transacting,
Do what?
transacting.
Exactly. He's one of my favorites, by the way. So first page on the right-hand side, I just plugged in some, one of my favorite agents right here, Zareen. And then someone that I've worked with in the past, I just plugged them in here, but always on the right side is going to show everyone involved on the transaction. From the seller side and the buyer side, and then of course the settlement agent, which is us, the title company. On the left side here is, whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. Okay, so on the left side we have the sales price, which is $230. Then in a couple of lines down, it shows the prorations for the county taxes. So you'll see that that category is adjustments for items paid in advance by the seller. So, and then if you'll go down a little bit, I kind of skip ahead and then go back. So if you'll scroll down a little bit, you'll see we're paying the 2022 taxes to the Dallas County Tax Office. So we're paying for the full year, and then we're providing a prorated credit to the seller. And that $244.30 is going to be charged to the buyer at closing as well. So we'll see that on the buyer's closing disclosure. Let's see, in addition to the current year's taxes, this particular property, this is actually a real property that I did some research on. So there are delinquent taxes, so we're collecting for those as well. You'll notice the seller, it's in an estate. And so typically with an estate, there are past due taxes. So we do an extensive tax search as well. That's included with the title commitment. Everybody will receive the tax certificate reflecting this information. You'll notice section into closing costs paid from column J in the amount of $16,093. So we'll go to the next page. So page 2, right now, the only fee that the seller is paying is the $500 escrow fee. So there's an escrow fee typically charged for each side, and it's the same amount for each side. Right. I went ahead and included the $34 release fee just in case there's any releases that from any loans or liens that were on the property. So I just wanted you all to see that is customary to see on the seller side on occasion as well.
So does that make sense? So if the seller has a mortgage, when they get the proceeds, the title company is going to pay off their mortgage and then record a release saying that mortgage was paid off. Just that's cleaning up the title, right? All right.
Mm-hmm. And okay, so we'll skip down to section H. So the bulk of the closing costs are commissions for each side. And so I just plugged in 3% for the seller side and the buyer side as well. There's a GARC fee, which goes to the state of Texas for any policies that are issued. And then you'll see the owner's title insurance premiums of $15.95. So that is based off of the sales price. So basically it's the higher the sales price, the higher the premium is going to be for the seller or the buyer. In this particular case, the seller is paying for the policy. I went ahead and plugged in the T19.1 and the T.3. Those are survey coverage endorsements. Sometimes those are selected on the contract. So I wanted y'all to be able to see those listed there as well. And they're always listed out individuals like that. And then if you'll notice, the total at the bottom of the page matches what page 1 had, $16,093.
So that line
So-
gets pulled over.
Correct. That line gets pulled over. So we're going to go back to the first page. So you'll see we've already reviewed the county taxes. So once we subtract all the charges from the credits, at the very bottom, you'll see the cash that's due to the seller in this particular case is $195,504.83. So, and once we open title, or even before we open title, if y'all have any listing appointments that you need information for, just shoot me an email and I can get you a seller net sheet. You know, and just provide whatever estimated list price or prices. If you need a few, just feel free to include that information. And what I do is I'll do a quick tax search in the tax records, plug that information in. I typically don't have their, you know, if they have a lien on there. So if they have a mortgage, typically people know, you know, a rough ballpark of how much they owe on their mortgage. So they could subtract that from the bottom line, but I'll also include, you know, commissions, home warranty, anything like that on those seller net sheets. So if y'all need those, feel free to reach out.
We also have on the Momentus website, there's also a really good like title fee estimator that you guys can do yourself. Of course, Randy can do it for you too, but just so you know, on the website, it's there. Is anyone having a hard time hearing? I just got that message from someone. No, everyone's okay?
No.
Okay, all right. Thanks.
Actually, I do have a fan on back here, so let me cut that off. That might be.
Oh, I don't think that's it. I think it was an internet issue.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Well,
Don't
I'll turn
start
it just in case.
Okay. Thanks.
Right. So that is the seller's CD. This one here is the buyer's closing disclosure. Now, generally, we as a title company do not provide the closing disclosure to the buyer. That is the lender's job to do that. What we do, however, we balance with the lender. Typically, it's supposed to be like 4 to 5 business days prior to closing. The lender will provide us with closing instructions. That's when we start balancing and getting everything worked out. There are some cases, and I'm sure some of you have experienced this, where we get closing instructions the day before closing or the day of closing. So I always keep everyone up to date on those types of things, especially if, you know, with, you know, the buyers in the middle of moving and all that fun stuff. And I typically try to schedule closings earlier in the morning, just so that way we can get everything funded and, you know, everything goes off without a hitch. So, but I did want to include this just so y'all will have an idea. It's identical to the one that the lender provides. And again, at the top, it includes all of the transaction information, the closing date, settlement agent, property address, buyer, seller. In this particular case, the loan amount, we just plugged in 200,000. On the lender's CD, it will include their interest rate and their principal and interest amount of their payment. Further down, you'll see the estimated monthly payment. I just plugged some numbers in, which we'll see on page 2 of this, for homeowners insurance and for property taxes. The next, where it says closing costs, 7848.45, that comes from page 2 as well. And so we'll review those details in just a moment. And then the very bottom line shows the cash to close. In this case, 35,000 and some change. So the lender does typically send out a CD several days prior to closing, which is the one we begin balancing with, but those numbers are not the final numbers. So they're always subject to change a little bit. So just let your clients know, you know, if you're representing the buyer, that is a possibility. The lenders are really good about, you know, keeping everyone informed as well.
So Randy, if you're like 5 days before closing and you haven't heard from the buyer's lender, Should you worry? Should you reach out to the lender? Like when should you start to be like, where's my CD?
I typically do it 4 to 5 days before closing, 4 to 5 business days before closing.
So as a buyer's agent, you just kind of need to have that date in your.
Yeah, just have that date in there. And what I typically do is I keep the agents updated. If we already have a thread going where the buyer is comfortable including everyone on the same email thread, I just CC, the agent and the buyer in my email to the lender. So each situation is different. Some don't like everybody on one thread, but regardless of whether if they're not on the same thread, I send a separate email to the agents, just letting them know, hey, we're closing in 4 days. I reached out to the lender for closing instructions. I'll keep you posted.
Awesome.
So,
cool.
yeah.
Thank you. Does this make sense? Does anyone have questions?
Yeah, I hope I'm not going too fast.
No, you're good. It just helps if there's a question to clarify, like usually you're at a closing and breezing through this stuff. So it's nice to have a minute to like, if you have any questions, go for it. If not, keep going. Thank you.
Here we go. Okay, so this is page 2 of the buyer's closing disclosure. So the first 2 sections are going to be the lender charges, and I just plugged in some random fees that are customary pretty much on every transaction. So the lender charges an origination fee, they have a processing fee, and typically an underwriting fee. If there is a mortgage broker that's involved, then the mortgage broker fee will be listed in section A as well, in addition to the origination fees. Section B has the appraisal, the lender attorney doc prep, credit report fee, flood cert, inspection fee, and tax certificate. The lender does do their own tax cert search, as well as us from the title side. So, and then section C is our charges, and you'll see the $500 escrow fee, which is also known as the settlement fee, listed in there, the GARC fee for the lender's policy. And in the state of Texas, when you're purchasing a property and receiving an owner's title policy and a lender's title policy, you get what's called a simultaneous issue discount. And so it automatically drops the lender's policy to a flat $100. And then, of course, the endorsements that are customary for the lenders, the T19, T30, and T36, those are additional costs, as you'll see there. Does anybody have any questions so far?
That makes sense, guys. What an endorsement is? I don't want to get too basic if you guys know what this is, but you have your basic policy, and then endorsements are things you pay extra for that are like additional coverage, like the survey endorsement that you guys have to put into the contract or not. Okay. All right. We're nodding. That's good. Thank you.
Then this is a continuation. So section E are the recording fees. So a recording fee for the deed, which is recorded in the real property records simultaneously with any mortgage, which is also known as the deed of trust. So those 2 are recorded after we've received funding approval from the lender and we have all the funds. If there is a release for the seller, then all 3 are recorded together, which you'll see the $34 there. In section F, sometimes there is a prepaid homeowners insurance premium that's listed there. For some reason, I did plug in a number, but I'm not quite sure why it did not flow over. But it's customary for the lenders to charge a full 12 months insurance premium up front. And then on F3, they do charge prepaid interest. For some reason, this did not flow over. My apologies, but you'll see the date 12/15 to 1/1. And so the lender typically charges a prepaid interest for that time period. Section G talks about escrow. So if the buyer's have an escrow account for their homeowners insurance and property taxes, they'll typically collect accordingly. So like we're at the end of the year, so they'll typically collect just for a couple of months, since, starting next year, there's going to be 11 or 12 payments prior to the insurance and taxes being paid. So all of next year's payments will pay the following homeowners insurance premium and taxes when those become due at this time. And then section H are just additional fees. So this is typically where you'll see HOA fees. So HOA dues, HOA resale certificate package, HOA transfer fee, HOA working capital. And I have seen over the past few months, contracts that are very, very detailed and very, very specific on these fees, because there was one seller, I think I think the working capital fee was like $2,000 or $3,000 and he had a fit, but in the contract, it said that the buyer was going to cover up to like $300 and then the seller was responsible for all other fees.
Yeah, so as a listing agent, guys, as a best practice, like if you're selling a property that's in a mandatory HOA, there's a lot of homework you should do up front. And I think you should you have to decide with your client, but I think it makes sense to order all of the HOA documents up front so they can be delivered and the buyer just acknowledges receipt in the contract, because that's an out for the buyer when they get the HOA documents. So reach out to us and let us do that for you in advance, because you're eliminating an out that the buyer has on the listing side. The other thing that you can do if you're being proactive with your HOA is to figure out what is that transfer fee cost, so that this doesn't happen like what Randy's talking about. So you're not surprised that your HOA charges a $2,000 transfer fee, and then that blank on the addendum for sale of property in a mandatory owners association, that you didn't put $300 and your seller has this huge $1,700 gap they have to cover then. So those are good ways you can be proactive listing agents. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay, good.
Fantastic. On the HOA companies too, it just kind of varies. So they will typically get a resale certificate to us within 7 to 10 business days. And so like Zareen was saying, it's good to go ahead and get this ordered ahead of time, because a lot of times we're kind of cutting it close to that deadline. And just let your for whatever reason, if we're not able to order it ahead of time and we just we order it when the contract comes in, let your clients know that the HOA will rush it, but they typically do charge for that. So it could range anywhere from like $100 to $300 on top of the resale certificate cost. So just kind of keep that in mind too, if they have any questions or concerns about that.
Yeah, that's a customer service thing is when you want to order the HOA documents in advance, most title companies are going to say, who's paying for this, and ask someone to give their credit card up front, right? But let us know and we'll help you out and get it ordered for you. It's just a customer service thing we can do for you guys.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other questions about HOA fees or anything like that? Everyone good? Okay. In addition to the HOA fees, this is where the home warranty would be. So if if it's listed that the seller is going to pay for a warranty on behalf of the buyer, that'll be listed here. In addition, so we'll reach out to the buyer and their agent, typically via email, asking if they have a preferred home warranty company they want to use. So I have a handful that I've used over the years. I'm not married to any particular one, because I always let the buyers pick. I'm like, it's your house, you pick whatever coverage you'd like, and then we'll we'll abide by that.
Yeah, and we have an email template we'll share at the end of the class that's like, here's a list of home warranty companies and a website that reviews them. And so that's a good little template you can just keep and then pass on to your buyers when it's time for them to choose, so that you're not advising them on which one to choose.
Right, so let's see. So that closing cost, you'll see where it's bolded in J, 78, 48, 45, that matched the closing cost amount from page 1. And so that kind of gives you a rundown of all the closing costs the buyer is paying. So we are going to go to page 3. So if you'll notice on here, the buyers is the left and the sellers on the right. So it still provides the closing costs that the buyers paid so far from page 2. And then it shows county taxes. We're charging the buyer $244.30 because the seller is being charged the full amount of taxes for that year. So we're giving them that prorated credit. Same thing would be for the HOA dues. Whatever date that the HOA dues are paid through, you're going to see a credit under the assessments section here, and it'll be prorated according to the closing date.
So one point to note about that, guys, since a lot of the property, this is not having anything to do with the closing disclosure, but just as agents, you're going to need to know this. Next year, because the property values increased dramatically this year, it is quite possible that when the buyers get the tax bills, Randy, help me out here if I'm explaining this wrong, that what was prorated and what they're actually paying is very different. Does that make sense? And so
Yes.
there's a document you sign at closing that says if the numbers are different, that they'll come back and adjust it, right? Your buyers that closed at the beginning of the year, it was before we knew what the new values were for this year. So we prorated using 2021's numbers, and 2021's valuation of the property was much lower than 2022's valuation. So we prorated using 2021's number, but the buyer didn't get enough credit from the seller. So the buyer's going to have to go back to the seller and say, hey, we agreed at closing, you would pay me the right amount of taxes, right? There's a tax proration agreement. So that's a conversation you're probably going to have. It is not up to you to fight that battle for them, but you can help them by reaching out to the title company and saying, you did the calculation on 2021. Can you do the calculation on 2022 and let us know what the seller owes? And a good title company will be happy to do that calculation for you. It is not their job to go after the seller to pursue it. That's really the buyer's job, but we can facilitate helping them figure out what that number is. The title company should be able to do that. The title company that closed you, right? Randall, am I explaining that right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
So you guys just need to be prepared that when tax bills come out, that might happen.
And there you'll see here in a couple of slides, the tax proration agreement that I have both parties sign, letting them know what the taxes were prorated, the annual amount that the taxes were prorated off of.
Yeah.
Okay, so section L, so it reflects the deposit there. So that's the earnest money deposit. And then it shows the loan amount as well. And then a little further down, it shows the option fee. On L10, I just typed in a realtor credit in there, just so that way y'all could be aware. I don't know if how often y'all do realtor credits, but I've been seeing that a lot lately over the past 6 months or so. And so a lot of them will give, a significant amount. And so we, on the back end, we deduct it from the commission, and then it's listed here as a credit to the buyer. So that's always disclosed as well. And just, which I'm sure y'all are aware, but anytime you do give a credit to any of your clients, please make sure it's listed on your CDA. So that way we have backup as well for our file, and the lender will need that as well. So, all right. And then at the bottom here, you'll see once, you add up the loan proceeds and then you deduct the closing costs, that's where we received the 35,000 and change from page 1. So, all All right. Any questions so far? Everyone's good? Okay.
I think we're good.
Okay. I hope I'm not making anyone fall asleep.
No, I mean, it's
Super exciting stuff.
information. Yeah, it is what it is. So,
All right, and then that's just the signature page of the buyer's closing disclosure. And it just shows who's all involved in the transaction. So the lender's name would go there. If there's a mortgage broker, their information, and then the brokers on both sides, and then, you know, us as the settlement agent, so. All right, so this is the Alta settlement statement. So y'all will see this used if there is a cash transaction. And it's I think it's pretty simple to read. In this particular case, all of the loan information from the CD we just reviewed flowed over to here. So if you see this and there's a loan amount and loan fees listed in there, then that means it's a hard money loan. So typically investors will do hard money loans. And then, you know, they'll rehab the property and, you know, when they sell, they'll pay everything off. But, you know, this is, pretty simple. So on the left side, it's seller. On the right side is the buyer, and it just shows all the fees that we just reviewed on the CD, but it's just in a different format here. Again, all the borrower fees on the right side, and then the seller fees on the left side. And then on page 3, you'll see the subtotals, and then you'll see due from borrower and then due to seller. So seller's walking away with 195 and change. Buyer, they're bringing 35,000 to the table. So so like I said, cash transactions or hard money loan transactions, this form will be used. And if your buyer is paying cash, then they have the option to DocuSign their documents as well. They're not required to come to closing. Seller is still required to come to closing because they're, you know, we have to record the deed and everything in the real property records. But a lot of buyers do like the DocuSign feature if they're paying cash, because, you know, everybody's busy and, you know, it's just a little more convenient for them. They are, of course, welcome to come into the office if they would like, but we just like to provide that DocuSign option. Anyone have any questions about the cash settlement statement? We're good? Okay. So this is a brief review of what we call the title company littles here. So this is we're still working out some formatting issues, so please don't pay attention to the top. But this is the form that will reflect the annual amount of the county taxes and what we're basing them off of. So we have the property address, the legal description, and then it shows, you know, the county taxes. If there's an HOA, we'll include that as well. Typically, city taxes, that piece is going to be blank because the county collects for all of the taxing authorities within the county, including the city and the school and everything. So as you'll see on number 2, it says, should the actual tax figures for the year prorated prove to be different, resulting in the necessity for an adjustment, the undersigned agree and consent to make appropriate adjustment between themselves, and Momentous Title shall have no responsibility in this regard.
So does that make sense, Greg? That's what we were just talking about. We can help you do the calculation, but it's not the title company isn't able to kind of pursue the seller for you, for the buyer.
Right.
Okay.
And then so then it continues to say seller recognizes their responsibility for all taxes prior to the date of the closing the subject transaction. Should it develop at a later date, the taxes other than those collected at closing are due for prior years. Seller agrees to make full settlement to Stewart Title Guarantee Company, which is our underwriter. So if Well, so this is kind of an interesting area. So when we do the tax certificate, it typically 99.9% of the time, it will reflect all of the delinquent taxes. However, in this particular case, it does, but depending on the timing of the death of the seller, and if the seller had any exemptions, rollback taxes may not have come into effect. Like in this particular case, they already assessed rollback taxes and they typically go back to the year that the seller passed away. So if they had over 65 or they had a homestead exemption or whatever exemptions they had, they'll go back to that year. And then after that, then they'll do the full assessed value as far as taxes go. Does that make sense? I hope I didn't confuse anyone.
I think that's good. I mean, I think the general gist of all these little documents, as you call them, the littles, is that if something's not right with the closing, everyone's agreeing they're going to make it right. That there's no get out of jail free.
Exactly. Yeah. And what we typically do too, because I do work a lot with properties that are in estates. What we typically do is we'll call the tax office, even though they may not have assessed the rollbacks, and see if we can get some sort of estimate. So, and we'll collect, so we'll get the estimate, and I typically collect 150% of that amount. So that way, when the rollback taxes do come out, we're going to get the bill as the title company because they're going to see that we closed this transaction. And then we'll cut that check out of escrow, and then whatever's left, we'll send it back to the estate or the family or the heirs. So.
Smart. Okay. All right. We have about 20 minutes left. Was that right? So we can keep plugging through.
Okay, perfect. Affidavits to debts and liens. This is a document that only the seller signs. So basically they're attesting that there's nothing outside of the contract. There's nothing outside of the title search that is owed on the property. So no judgments, liens, they don't owe contractors or anything like that.
So if a contractor came back after closing and said, hey, I had a lien against this property, the seller has signed this and said, there's nothing else, and the seller would be responsible for that.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Good one.
Yeah. This one is for, this lets us know if we need to do a 1099 or not. This particular form here is for people selling their homestead or second home. So in this particular case, which is an estate, we would not use this form, but I wanted to include it just so that way y'all know what it looks like. And it just asks a series of questions. If this was their principal residence for the last 2 years or more, you know, did they acquire the home where section 1031 exchange of the IRS code applied? And we are not tax attorneys or CPAs. So, but the questions are pretty simple and they're pretty easy to understand. So I just kind of elaborate on the questions a little bit, but we can't tell them which answer to provide, whether true or false. So they're going to have to, they have to pick on their own. Okay. Let's see, these are two different documents here. The one on the left is seller disbursement of proceeds. So they can choose to do a check, they could do a wire, they could pick up the check. We could FedEx it to them at no cost. Just gives them some options on how they want to receive their proceeds. And then if they want to wire, of course, there's the wire authorization form on the right that provides the details, the bank details. Also, which you may already know this, but I just kind of like to remind everyone, especially in this case, so it's in an estate. So whoever is head of the estate, they have to have the funds wired to the estate's bank account. We can't wire it to any other account. Same thing with the seller. If the sellers are, let's say they're not married, but they're both vested in title, then unless it's stated otherwise, we'll divide the proceeds 50-50. and we'll have each of them sign each other's wire instructions as well, just as an acknowledgement. And if we're doing that as well, if we're splitting proceeds, then I typically will make a note on the seller's closing disclosure as well, saying, you know, Elvis is getting 50,000, Priscilla's getting 50,000. So just so that way there's no confusion and no one can come back and say, oh, well, I was supposed to get more than him, or I was supposed to get more than her. So that kind of takes care of that. Let's see. This is just a waiver of settlement agent responsibility with respect to the IRS code. Let's see, give me one second. I'm on the verge of needing reading glasses, so forgive me.
It's basically just a CYA, right?
Yes, so this is a CYA regarding, you know, a foreign person that we're not responsibility, or we're not responsible for any additional taxes that any foreign person owes when selling their property, is basically what this says. So.
Gotcha.
We have this nifty little form here, agreement to split proceeds. So if we do have a case like a divorce, or if it's, you know, they're not married, but they want to split, then this is the additional form that they sign, you know, indicating that. And then this one, since Stewart Title is one of our underwriters, they include the privacy policy notice. So if it's on a Stewart Title commitment, we'll include that. We also have title resource. So if it's on title resources, then they'll have a privacy policy notice. It just states they don't sell or give away any of their personal information. This is a substitute 1099-S. So if it's in an estate or if it's in an LLC, we'll have them sign this and provide the EIN number for the estate or their LLC instead of filling out the true or false 1099 document. Texas disclosure. So these fees here are already disclosed on the closing disclosure. In the state of Texas, they just require us to outline it on a separate document, just reflecting, you'll see the on page 1, the owner's policy, the lender's policy, and the endorsements that attach to that as well. Everyone involved in the transaction here. And then commissions being paid. The broker's information is here. And then typically the recording fees are listed here as well. So we have the seller signing as well as the buyers, and then we sign as the title company as well. And then let's see why. Whoops, sorry guys. Okay, what happens at closing? So typically, you know, the escrow officer is there, the sellers are there, the buyers are there, and the agents accompany, their respective agents accompany them as well.
Sometimes the lender will come.
Sometimes the lender will come. On the seller side, anyone vested in title will need to attend closing, and we'll reach out ahead of time to let them know, you know, who's required to attend closing and what they need to bring. Typically, they need to bring a valid government issued ID. So driver's license and passports, or just a simple Texas identification card that looks like a driver's license, but it just says Texas ID card in big green letters at the top. So I always remind everyone to bring one of those. I know it sounds silly, but you'd be surprised how many people have come to closing and they have an expired driver's license or their ID's expired and I can't sign them. So I always remind everyone to do that. That happened to me probably about a year ago. One of the heirs, they were selling their parents' property. His driver's license had been expired for several years. So we had to wait a couple of months for him to get a renewed driver's license. So yeah. thankfully, the buyer was patient and he was an investor, so it didn't kill the deal. It just delayed it a little bit. Okay, so funding and possession. So typically the lender provides funding approval. I always say 2 hours just to be on the safe side. Once everyone signs, we send the documents to the lender, they review, and then provide us with a funding number. And so, and then I also let everyone know how we're looking on funds. Do we have the buyer's wire? Do we have the buyer's cashier's check? Or and has the lender sent their loan proceeds as well? So that way, once we do get funding approval, I can give them an estimated time frame of when the seller can expect their funds and when the keys can be handed off. So
technically that should be a switch, right? Like the buyer doesn't get their keys in their possession until the seller has sent in their funds. And the whole point of the escrow, the title company as the escrow officer is to be the third party that's holding both, that can collect both and then switch both, right?
Correct. Sometimes the sellers will say, just go ahead and give them the keys at closing so they don't have to come back. Just tell them we don't want them entering the property until we have that funding approval. So I always check with the sellers to see what they want to do. So, because as we know, we don't want anyone going in the house or moving anything into the house until we have funding approval.
Yes, we always used to have a saying at Bloom, like closing day is not moving day, because we have like
right.
Does anyone have any questions or anything crazy that happened to them at a closing that they want to ask about? Any timing questions? This all makes sense.
Wait, so did he say that the seller has to be there, Zareen?
Well, so the seller, the most important document of conveyance is the deed that's going to be recorded in the real property records, and they need a wet signature on the deed. So yes, a seller is going to have to show up and sign by hand, unless you do remote online notary, and there's a lot of steps involved. It is possible for a seller not to be there, but that's something that you would have to have been planning far in advance. Randy,
Okay.
is that
Right. And we'll reach out, and communicate with the sellers and ask what their schedule is. And if they're traveling, and, I've had several sellers where they've already moved and they're at their destination city. So we can set up a mobile notary for them as well. Depending on where they're at, this goes for buyers and sellers. I will drive to them. So, if the property's in Fort Worth, we can close at the Briggs Fort Worth office. If it's in Frisco, we'll close at the Briggs North office, or, whatever works for them. I've signed at Starbucks. I've signed at a restaurant bar before. It's really,
cheers?
really right. It's really whatever's most convenient for them.
But I guess, Kathleen, that's like the practical answer to your question. At the end of the day, like the buyer also has to be there if they're getting a note, because anything that's going to be recorded in the real property records needs like a human being signature that a notary saw them sign. So typically if the buyer's getting a loan, they need to be there in person to sign all of their loan documents in front of a notary. And the same thing with the seller has to sign the deed in front of a notary. So you need a wet signature. The only client that really doesn't have to show up is the buyer who's paying cash.
That's correct.
Does that help?
Yes.
Okay, cool. All righty.
So
Okay.
as I was saying before, we reach out to the buyers and the sellers for closing and copy, agents, home warranty. We email them ahead of time. Typically after we, get the contract in, we'll go through and highlight all of the key points in there. And then post-closing communication, that involves us, depending on their choice, some want physical paper, some want email communication with a copy of their docs. So we'll do either one. And of course, if we're waiting on funding approval, I'm kind of old fashioned. I like to pick up the phone and call everyone and just say, hey, we're funded. But if the clients would prefer an email, I'll definitely send an email, and then of course, copy y'all on the email to your clients.
So And you guys as agents, like the title company is going to be sending like official correspondence about what's going on. We have some templates that you guys, and I can email these to everyone who attended, I'll share. I'm sure if you've been in the business long enough, you have your own templates because you don't want to write the same email 100 times. So you just start saving them. You can save it in ReChat. You can save a draft in your Outlook. Obviously, you're going to have to customize it to each deal. But Randy, if you click through, we have a few emails we can show you. This one is a template that I used to use. It's just the home warranty selection email, kind of explaining that the seller has agreed to pay the home warranty and then like what it covers. These are your options. It gives a rough explanation. And then it says like, these are ones you can choose from. So I found this to just be helpful just to save. And then I don't know how far in advance before closing do you order the home warranty, Randy? Because that's something that the title company will order it for you, but the buyer has to instruct the title company who they want it from and what coverage they want.
Yeah. So we typically do that within the first couple of days after receiving the executed contract. And then if we haven't received a response, then we'll follow up. We'll usually give them a couple of days because we don't want to be on them every single day because they have, a million things going on. They're trying to move and, all that fun stuff. So, but we do follow up every couple of days until we get an answer. If they don't respond at all, then we will typically give y'all a call and ask you to get involved. If we've called them, 2 or 3 times or emailed them 2 or 3 times and no response, then we may ask you to help us out on that a little bit.
Does anyone else have like a genius way of handling this with their buyers? No. Okay. Well, one thing to note too is if the seller agreed to pay $500 and your client decided they want basic coverage plus pool equipment coverage and that's $600, the buyer can always pay the difference and get the coverage that they want. Just something good to know. They're not limited to what the seller agreed to pay on their behalf.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. All righty. What do we got next? Okay. So what we have here then is like a couple emails. Like these can get really super long. And, some clients, depending on what their personality type is, like don't have the attention span, but at minimum, you should be sending them these emails as kind of a CYA so that they're never like, you didn't tell me I couldn't move on closing day, right? You just need to have some templates saved that you can like say like, yeah, I did tell you that. Obviously you're going to talk to them about it too, but here's a basic one. This is just kind of like a to-do list for them of little things that's going to happen before closing, on the day of closing, and then you can put like the closing date and time. Obviously you're going to customize this for each situation, but it's good to kind of start here and add or subtract. So that's one. Click to the next one, please. And then this is another one for the seller, right? It's pretty detailed, but it kind of says this is your to-do list of things. I know you guys do a lot of this stuff for your clients. But it's nice to just put in writing, like that there's some responsibilities on them too. So that's one for the seller. And then the next one this is like a really detailed one. You may not want to do both. You may want to send the less detailed one 2 weeks before closing and this one the week before closing or a week and whatever. But this one's really detailed, like what you need to bring, explains it. All the details, like kind of answers questions. Yes, I'm going to share all of these templates after class with you guys. I just wanted you to see them. I think that's it. That's all we got.
Yep.
Does anyone else have any great templates that they use that we should add to this presentation? Does that pretty much, of course, this is a closing one, but in our other classes, we talk about like our congratulations, you're under contract email that has critical dates and things like that. Like we share templates in all of these classes, but I'll share these closing ones with you guys now for sure. Thank you, Randy. Who has questions? We're a little bit early. Gavin's asking JB, what's your process? Because she's the queen of systems. She may be stepped away. Okay, so does this help? Is there anything else that would be helpful in this class that we didn't cover that we could add? or anything that was too much and we can take away. I'm gonna send you guys a follow-up email that has like the Trek CE survey, so you can leave any feedback there, or you can just tell me. And also I'll attach these templates, which obviously you'll need to customize every time. But, anyone have anything else? We're right on time, so excellent work. Guys, Randy is under the weather today and he specifically is here to do this. So thank you. He powered through. That was helpful. Thank you so much. I'll go over, I have, Hannah, Michaela, Kathleen, Hector, Nora, Patrick, and Gavin for CE credit. If you want CE credit and I didn't say your name, put your name into the chat. I'll leave it up for a while. But I think that's all we got. Okay, I'll add Leslie.
And if y'all think of anything after the class today, just shoot me an email or give me a call. I think the next slide. Yeah. And I like texting too. So if you're a texter, feel free to text. So, and no question is ever a dumb question. So.
That's right. That's right.
Hey, Doreen, I have a question.
What's up?
And I mean, it's part of closing. What do you do, or what kind of process in terms of if it's a lease back?
Good question. And I have seen lots of those. So if it's a lease back, typically the lease back information is included with the executed contract. And that will be reflected on the closing disclosures for the seller and the buyer. So if the seller is leasing back for 2 weeks or a month, if there's a deposit we need to collect, we'll collect that.
Do you collect it? Because I've had some title companies say like they don't want to collect it and they just want it to be between the parties. Do you collect it?
We do.
Okay. I think that's the way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit cleaner, so everyone feels comfortable. I've had one instance where the lender was like, nope, they're gonna have to take this offline and do it separate. But so it's really I'll do it every time, but if the lender's underwriter's like, so then we'll, say.
Or if the seller is paying like $100 a day to stay there, and so it's gonna be $700, the buyers will get a credit at closing, right? For the rent. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So.
But is there a process that you might recommend for? I got caught up in that we did a lease back for a month. And when she moved out, all the paintings came down. And of course, the inspector's not, when we did the inspection, the pictures didn't come off the wall, and it was a nightmare. It wasn't what we anticipated.
Like what was like in terms of actual damage to the property, or just in terms of nails?
It was damage. Yes, I mean, like.
Well, that's a seller's, there's two separate situations there. One of them is just if there's material conditions on the property that they fail to disclose, like that's a seller's disclosure issue, right? And so that would be like kind of a lawsuit situation. If it's just the sellers left and they left the house a mess, or they banged things up that weren't like that at closing, then that's when you do need a security deposit. And I know you guys do these leases all the time and you don't put in a security deposit and you don't put any payment from the seller, but I really, really encourage you to protect your buyer. Please put a security deposit in there so that the buyer has some amount of leverage against the seller. Obviously, after the seller moves out, the buyer under Texas law is going to have 30 days to return the security deposit as everything is fine. And they do have to do that. Or they have to give an itemized list of what was not fine and what they used the security deposit to pay for.
Okay.
That makes sense. I mean, and Gavin, in your case, if there's like a material property condition that was not disclosed, that's not a title company or a lease back issue. That's really like a seller's disclosure issue.
Okay, well, I'm glad you said that, because that hadn't occurred to me. And when we worked on it, that wasn't brought up in terms of the disclosure, but it was a nightmare.
Yeah, well, yeah. We can talk about it offline, like the specific like facts
Okay,
and what's the right way to approach it for sure.
A lot right there, though. Thank you.
Good. Anyone else? You guys can go. I don't want to keep you longer than our hour, but if there's any other questions, we're always here. Don't be shy. Thank you, Randy.
Absolutely. Thank y'all. Y'all have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.